Isel Chosen, the Ice King of the business world, has spent years building an empire, but when his marriage crumbles and his company's future hangs in the balance, he strikes a deal. A contract marriage. Enter Kaylee Iden, a brilliant financial analyst with a mountain of medical bills and a need for a life-changing opportunity. What begins as a cold transaction soon becomes much more than either of them anticipated. As the lines between business and love blur, Isel finds himself falling for the woman who might just be the one to melt his frozen heart. But in a world where trust is a luxury, can love truly conquer all? At 35, Isel Chosen was a man who had everything: an empire spanning continents, an office that overlooked the city he'd built, and a life carefully curated for success. But as he sat in his penthouse office, divorce papers scattered across his desk, he felt like a man on the edge of losing it all. His marriage to Adrienne, once the epitome of perfection, was crumbling in front of him, and the betrayal he had uncovered ran deeper than his heart could handle. His company, the jewel of his life, was at risk, and he was losing his grip on the one thing that had always been his cornerstone: control. As he stared at the signature on the papers, it wasn't just his wife's name that stood out. It was the name of a man who had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes. James Hartford, the CEO of Hartford Global, a rival company, had been playing a game of corporate chess, and Isel had been the pawn. His marriage, it seemed, had been nothing more than a transaction in a much larger scheme. But now Isel was ready to rewrite the rules. "Find me a wife," he had said to Marcus Chen, his head of legal. A business arrangement, no emotions, no chances for betrayal, just a solid, ironclad contract that would protect his company and his future. His eyes hardened as he thought about it. This time, he wouldn't fall for the trap of love. This time, he would stay in control. But when Kaylee Iden, a young financial analyst with an impeccable track record, walked into his office, Isel had no idea just how much his life was about to change. Kaylee needed the money more than she was willing to admit, and a contract marriage with a CEO could solve everything. She wasn't naive enough to think it would be anything more than a business deal, but what neither of them expected was how quickly the line between business and personal would blur. Isel's cold, business-first mentality was about to face its biggest test: the heart. Little did they both know their contract would become the foundation of something far more complicated and far more dangerous than either of them had planned. The city stretched out beneath Isel's office like a living, breathing thing, a sprawling landscape of steel and glass, skyscrapers reaching toward the sky in a calculated dance of ambition. At 35, Isel Chosen had risen to the top of this world, a ruthless CEO with a reputation built on precision and control. His company, Chosen Industries, was the crown jewel of the business world, and nothing, no one, could threaten it. Or so he thought. The divorce papers on his desk mocked him with their cold formality, the ink on the page betraying the end of a marriage that, until recently, had seemed like a perfect arrangement. Adrienne, his wife, had been more than just a partner in his personal life. She'd been a symbol of his success. Beautiful, poised, and fiercely intelligent, she had embodied everything he had worked for. But now, her betrayal was written in the pages before him. And the pain, as much as he tried to bury it beneath layers of indifference, gnawed at him relentlessly. "Mr. Chosen," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The board is waiting in conference room A." Isel's fingers hovered over the divorce papers, tracing the elegant yet now hollow signature of Adrienne. 5 years of marriage, and it had all come down to this. The echoes of his father's voice, the old mantra to never show weakness, rang in his mind. Never let them see you bleed. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes," he replied, his voice cool and detached. He stood adjusting his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, pulling it tighter around his chest like armor. Professional, as always. His father's words echoed once more. Business first, always. The wall-to-wall windows of his office offered a panoramic view of the city he had conquered, but tonight the amber glow of the setting sun only reminded him of what he had lost. As he gathered the divorce papers, slipping them into his desk drawer, a text message from his sister, Rain, buzzed on his phone. "Big brother, please tell me you're not still at the office. You need to rest." He smiled bitterly, his thumb brushing over the screen. Rest. Sleep had become a distant memory, ever since the day he had discovered the truth. The truth that Adrienne's affair was not just a personal betrayal, but a professional one as well. Hartford Global, the company Isel had been locked in battle with for years, had been trying to acquire Chosen Industries. And what better way to get the inside track than to seduce the CEO's wife? The thought made bile rise in his throat. He walked to the bar in the corner of his office, pouring himself 2 fingers of 30-year-old scotch, a gift from his father the day he had taken over as CEO. His father had always believed in handling adversity with grace, never showing weakness. The liquor burned as he swallowed, but it was a welcome distraction from the bitterness churning in his gut. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," Isel called, his voice steady, betraying nothing of the storm inside. Marcus Chen, his head of legal, stepped into the room with a stack of papers in his hands. "The final settlement documents are ready for your review, sir," Marcus said, his tone professional as ever. Isel nodded, gesturing for Marcus to place the papers on his desk. He picked them up, scanning through the contents quickly. No surprises. Adrienne had agreed to all the terms, including the non-disclosure agreement and waiving any claim to company shares or property. Of course, Hartford Global had made sure she wouldn't need anything from her soon-to-be ex-husband. "Anything unusual?" Isel asked, his gaze sharp as he looked over the final settlement. "No, sir, as expected," Marcus replied. "But there is something else." Isel's eyebrows arched slightly in question. "Go on." "The board is concerned about the succession issue," Marcus continued, his voice lower now. "As you know, Chosen Industries bylaws set by your father require the CEO to be married and to have an heir in order to maintain control. It's never been an issue before, but with the divorce looming and your position potentially at risk, it has become a critical concern. They're worried about stability." Isel's jaw tightened at the mention of succession. His father's rigid rules that had worked for him, were now threatening everything Isel had built. He exhaled slowly, steadying his thoughts. "Tell me, Marcus," Isel said, his voice low and controlled. "How does one find a wife who won't sell company secrets to the highest bidder?" Marcus hesitated. "There are arrangements. Contract marriages aren't uncommon in our circles." The suggestion hit Isel like a sudden jolt, and for a moment he felt a flash of revulsion. A contract marriage. The thought should have repulsed him, but instead, something about it, something about the cold business nature of it appealed to him. No emotions, no chances for betrayal, just clear terms, mutual benefit. "Draw up a preliminary contract," Isel said, his voice firm. "Something ironclad. I want clauses for everything. Infidelity, corporate espionage, social media behavior. Leave nothing to chance." Marcus nodded, making notes on his tablet. "Any specific requirements for the candidate?" Isel turned back to the window, watching the city as it transitioned from day to night. He thought for a moment before answering. "Someone intelligent enough to understand what they're signing up for. professional background in finance or law, no existing connections to competing corporations, and absolutely no one from Adrienne's social circles. Marcus made another note. Shall we have HR begin discreet screenings? Yes, Isel replied, his tone decisive, and tell them to move quickly. Time is of the essence. With that, Isel slid the divorce papers into his desk drawer. He couldn't afford to show any weakness, not now. The sharks were circling his company, waiting for any sign of vulnerability. As he followed Marcus out of the office toward the conference room, his mind was already shifting gears. This time, there would be no room for love. This marriage would be exactly what it should have been all along, a business transaction. Little did he know fate had other plans, and somewhere in the city, Kaylee Iden, a young financial analyst, was about to receive a phone call that would change both their lives forever. Kaylee Iden's fingers flew across the keyboard as she meticulously analyzed the financial data on her screen. The glow of her dual monitors highlighted the sharpness of her green eyes, focused entirely on the numbers in front of her. It was well past 7:30 p.m., but the quiet hum of Sterling and Associates' financial analysis department didn't faze her. Most of her colleagues had long since left for the night, but Kaylee had work to do. Her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves, and every extra hour she worked was one step closer to covering those mounting expenses. She minimized a notification that flashed across her screen, hospital payment due, and continued sifting through the data. The treatments were experimental, expensive, and insurance only covered a fraction. Her mother's health was deteriorating, and the burden was starting to feel like too much. "Still here, Wonder Girl?" came a voice from behind her. Kaylee looked up to see Jasmine, the office manager, leaning against her cubicle wall. Jasmine's designer outfit looked untouched by the long day, her makeup as flawless as always. Unlike Kaylee, who had long since ditched the heels for comfort, Jasmine was always impeccably put together. "I'm just finishing up the Morrison Group analysis," Kaylee replied, pushing her glasses up her nose. They were her one vanity, designer frames that she'd splurged on after her first bonus. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "You might want to hold off on that one. Word is, Drake Morrison's more interested in a hostile takeover of Chosen Industries than any legitimate business opportunity." Kaylee's ears perked up. She had been following Chosen Industries stock for months, noticing patterns that suggested internal turmoil. The news of CEO Isel Chosen's impending divorce had sent shockwaves through the financial world, but details about it had remained surprisingly private. She'd tried to dig deeper, but there was little to be found. "Speaking of Chosen Industries," Jasmine continued, her voice dropping conspiratorially, "HR's been getting some interesting calls about you." Kaylee blinked, her hand freezing over her mouse. "Me? Why?" Jasmine shrugged, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "No idea, but Marcus Chen himself was asking about your background check results." Marcus Chen, head of legal at Chosen Industries. Kaylee's mind raced. Why would the head of legal at one of the most powerful corporations in the country be interested in her? She was a junior financial analyst, barely on the radar in the vast landscape of corporate giants. Before she could ask more, her phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Normally, she would let it go to voicemail, but something about it felt urgent. She picked up. "Miss Iden," came a crisp, professional voice. "This is Marcus Chen from Chosen Industries. I apologize for calling so late, but we have a rather urgent matter to discuss. Would you be available for a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? Kaylee's heart raced, her mind already working through possibilities. A meeting? With someone from Chosen Industries? She swallowed and kept her voice steady. May I ask what this is regarding? I'm afraid I can only discuss the details in person, Marcus replied smoothly. But I can assure you it's a legitimate business proposition that could be life-changing. Life-changing. The words hung in the air. Her eyes flicked to the notification that had popped up on her screen. The hospital bill again. Her mother's treatment was growing increasingly expensive. This could be the opportunity she had been waiting for. "I'll be there," she said, surprising even herself with how easily the words came out. "Excellent," Marcus replied. "A car will pick you up at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow." Kaylee hung up, her mind racing. A car would pick her up. She had barely processed what that meant before Jasmine reappeared. "So?" Jasmine asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "What's it about?" Kaylee turned, still in a daze. "I'm meeting Marcus Chen tomorrow morning. He said it's a life-changing proposition." Jasmine's eyes practically glittered. A life-changing proposition? From that Marcus Chen? Wow, what did you do to get on his radar? Kaylee hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the spreadsheets on her screen. Everything about this felt surreal. But one thing was certain. Whatever was coming next, it was going to change everything. The next morning, Kaylee found herself in the back of a sleek black Mercedes, watching as her neighborhood morphed into the financial district. The Chosen Industries building rose ahead of her like a gleaming tower, its 100 stories of glass and steel reflecting the sunlight. She felt small, insignificant in the face of such corporate power. But the weight of her mother's medical bills kept her focused, reminding her that she had a mission to complete. Security cleared her with surprising efficiency, and before she knew it, she was being escorted to a private elevator. Her reflection in the mirrored walls showed a young woman doing her best to look composed, honey blonde hair twisted into a professional bun, minimal makeup, and a dark grey suit that was the most expensive item in her wardrobe. When the elevator doors opened, she was led to a reception area, and standing there was Marcus Chen himself, his reputation for efficiency evident in every crisp movement. "Miss Iden," he greeted her, "thank you for coming. Please, follow me." They entered a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, but Kaylee barely noticed the spectacular view. Her attention was immediately drawn to the man standing at the head of the table. Isel Chosen, the CEO of Chosen Industries. He was taller than she expected, impeccably dressed in a custom suit that highlighted his athletic build. His presence was magnetic, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of his steel-grey eyes, which were focused on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Despite his calm demeanor, there was something undeniably powerful about him. "Miss Iden," his voice was deep, laced with the weight of authority. "Please sit." Kaylee took the seat offered to her, acutely aware of the man's presence. He didn't sit immediately, instead continuing to study her with an unreadable expression. She could feel the walls closing in on her, the weight of this meeting settling into her chest like an invisible pressure. "Your analysis of the Morrison Group's financial strategies," Isel began, "particularly your notes on their pattern of hostile takeovers through personal leverage, is impressive work." Kaylee's mind raced, trying to follow the conversation. Her analysis of Morrison's moves had been an ongoing project, one she hadn't yet submitted to her superiors. The fact that Isel was acknowledging it in front of her sent a rush of adrenaline through her. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves gnawing at her. "We've reviewed your background," Marcus cut in, his tone businesslike, "and we believe you have the skills and the discretion we need. The question is, what do you know about contract marriages?" The question caught Kaylee off guard. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. Contract marriages? Isel finally took his seat, his eyes never leaving hers. "We're offering you a business proposition, a marriage contract, 2 years minimum, with very specific terms and considerable compensation." Kaylee's heart skipped a beat as she processed the words. A marriage contract? It didn't make sense. Before she could ask for clarification, Marcus slid a document across the table. Kaylee opened it cautiously, her eyes scanning the first few pages. The numbers were staggering, compensation that would cover her mother's treatment many times over. Her throat tightened as she forced the words out. "Why me?" "Because you're brilliant," Isel said simply. "And because you have a pressing need, a need we can help with. While you help us maintain stability during a crucial period." Kaylee's mind reeled. The terms of the contract were clear, but what would it really mean to sign her life away for 2 years? And what exactly was she getting herself into with a man like Isel Chosen? Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. Instead, she focused on the document in front of her, feeling the weight of the decision press down on her. A business arrangement, no emotions, no strings attached. But in a world where business and personal lives collided so easily, could she really keep it that way? She looked up at Isel, who was still watching her with those unblinking grey eyes. It was clear he wasn't just offering a contract. He was offering power, security, and perhaps a chance to escape the financial nightmare that had been her life. One question remained. Could she sign her life away for 2 years to save her mother's future, and perhaps her own? The air in Isel Chosen's penthouse office was thick with tension as Kaylee sat across from him, scanning the documents laid out before her. She had reviewed the contract once more, closely, thoroughly, but with every clause, every stipulation, the weight of her decision grew heavier. This was not just about money. It was not just about saving her mother's life. It was about a business deal, one that tied her to a man like Isel, a man who had turned cold ambition into an art form. It was about signing away 2 years of her life, 2 years that could change everything. She felt the room close in around her as Isel sat silently, his gaze unyielding. His calm presence was unnerving, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in her mind. "Are you sure about this?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. Isel leaned back in his chair, his eyes flickering briefly to the stack of documents in front of her. "You're not being forced into anything, Kaylee. You're choosing this." His voice was steady, but there was something more beneath it. Something that made her second-guess herself. She had always prided herself on her analytical mind, but now it was hard to separate the emotional weight of the situation from the cold logic of the contract. "You realize what I'm agreeing to, right?" Kaylee said, her fingers tightening around the contract. "This is no simple arrangement. Public appearances, social events, media scrutiny, and all of it with the expectation that I'll have an heir within 2 years. That's not just a business deal, Isel. That's a life." Isel's eyes darkened, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "It's business, just like any other. You knew this was the price when you stepped into my office yesterday." Kaylee swallowed, trying to focus. She had come here for a solution. Her mother's medical bills, the constant pressure of debt, the stress of her daily life, it was too much. This opportunity, this contract, was an escape. The numbers were staggering. The trust fund for her mother's treatment, the security, the resources, it could all be hers if she signed. But at what cost? She glanced back down at the pages. It was all laid out, clauses about infidelity, corporate espionage, personal conduct. No room for mistakes, no chance for weakness. She was to be a partner in name and perhaps in public, but nothing more. But there was one clause that caught her eye. The heir. the one thing that set this apart from any ordinary business deal. An heir conceived and born within the next 2 years. "I don't understand," Kaylee said, her voice quiet but firm. "Why does it matter so much? Why not just find someone willing to sign a contract without this requirement? Why all the details?" Isel shifted in his seat, his gaze briefly shifting toward the window overlooking the city. The sunset was beginning to cast long shadows across the glass, painting everything in a shade of amber. For a moment, the hardness in his expression softened. "It's not just about keeping control of the company," he said, his voice lower now, as if he were sharing something personal. "My father built Chosen Industries on the principle of family, a family business, a family man at the helm. He left me with the responsibility to uphold that legacy, and according to our bylaws, the CEO must be married and have an heir to maintain leadership. Without those two things, I can't guarantee my position, and I won't let anyone take what I've built. Not now." Kaylee's heart beat faster as she processed his words, the burden of leadership, the need for power and control. She had always assumed that Isel's cold exterior was simply the result of ambition, but now it seemed there was more to it. He wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was someone who had been shaped by the unyielding expectations of a legacy he hadn't asked for, a role he hadn't chosen for himself. She wanted to feel sorry for him, wanted to reach out, offer some kind of understanding, but she had her own problems to solve, and those problems were too pressing to be ignored. "What happens if I don't agree?" she asked, her voice suddenly more vulnerable than she intended. Isel's gaze locked onto hers, a sharp, calculating look in his eyes. "You do what you want, Kaylee. You can walk away, but you'd be walking away from the only opportunity that will guarantee your mother's future. And your own." His words hung in the air, heavy with consequence. She could walk away, but she knew the risk of doing so. Her mother's treatments, the mounting debt, the constant stress. If she said no, what would happen? Would she be able to find another solution? Would she even survive financially without this deal? Kaylee let out a slow breath, weighing the options. There was no easy choice here. No clear path forward. "I'll need time," she finally said, standing up, her voice firm but carrying a hint of uncertainty. "Of course," Isel said, his voice softening slightly. "Take the time you need, but know that time is something we don't have much of." As she turned to leave, Kaylee paused. She had come here for a business deal, but now she was faced with something much deeper. This contract, this deal, wasn't just about money. It was about control, power, and a future that was being shaped by forces much bigger than her. And as she stepped out of Isel's office and into the cool evening air, she realized that this choice, whatever she decided, would be the most important one of her life. The night after her meeting with Isel, Kaylee lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced, replaying every word, every clause of the contract. The numbers were incredible, enough to clear her mother's debts and secure her future for years to come. But there was something unsettling about it. The more she thought about it, the more she questioned her decision. Was this really the solution? Could she truly live a life built on terms and conditions? She couldn't shake the image of Isel sitting there so calmly, explaining the stakes like it was just another business transaction. His eyes had softened when he spoke about his father, the legacy of Chosen Industries, the weight of the family name. She had seen a side of him that, despite his cold exterior, revealed a man who wasn't just a businessman, he was a son, bound by duty and a relentless need to protect what he had built. Kaylee had always believed in making her own choices, shaping her destiny with her own hands. But this This felt like something else. Was it a chance at freedom, or was it just another cage dressed up in a shiny contract? The sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand interrupted her thoughts. She reached for it, her stomach twisting when she saw the number. It was from an unknown contact, a number she didn't recognize. "Curious?" she answered. "Kaylee Iden?" came the deep, controlled voice on the other end. "This is Marcus Chen. I apologize for contacting you so late, but there's something you need to know before you make any decisions." She sat up straight in bed, her heart pounding. "What is it?" "Meet me tomorrow. I'll explain everything," Marcus said, his voice steady and calm. "This is about more than just the marriage contract. It's about you, Kaylee. And it's about Chosen Industries." The line went dead before she could respond. She stared at the phone, confusion swirling in her chest. What was he talking about? What more could there possibly be? The next morning, Kaylee walked into Chosen Industries building, a knot tightening in her stomach. The sleek glass tower loomed above her, imposing and cold. She'd been in and out of the building many times as a financial analyst, but today felt different. Today she wasn't just a part of the machinery. She was about to be pulled into something far deeper, something that would change the course of her life. She was greeted by Marcus at the reception desk and led to a private elevator, her pulse quickening. As the doors closed behind them, she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The soft hum of the elevator was the only sound between them as they ascended to the top floors. Marcus led her into a small conference room where he gestured for her to sit. He didn't waste time. "I'm not here to convince you to sign the contract, Kaylee," he said, his expression serious. "I'm here to make sure you understand what's at stake, what you're getting into." Kaylee leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath before speaking. "Isel's position as CEO isn't the only thing on the line. This marriage, this arrangement, it's about securing the future of Chosen Industries. But it's also about protecting Isel from the people who want to see him fall. There's something you need to know about his ex-wife, Adrienne." Kaylee frowned. "Adrienne? What does she have to do with this?" Marcus looked around the room, checking to make sure they were alone. "Everything. You're not the first woman to be pulled into Isel's orbit, Kaylee. Adrienne, well, let's just say she didn't marry him for love. And she didn't leave him because of personal reasons either." Kaylee's mind raced. "What are you saying?" "There are people who have been working behind the scenes," Marcus continued, his voice lowering. "People with interests in Chosen Industries, people who have manipulated Isel's personal life for years. Adrienne, she's been part of a much larger plan. And the truth about her betrayal goes deeper than just a failed marriage." Kaylee's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of plan?" Marcus stood, walking over to the window. "Isel's enemies have been trying to infiltrate Chosen Industries for years. They've used Adrienne as a pawn, manipulating her to get close to Isel, to extract information, to weaken him. They know Isel's greatest weakness is his need for control. And they've been using his personal life to destroy him, piece by piece." Kaylee felt a chill run down her spine. She had thought she understood the stakes, but this was something else entirely. "There's more," Marcus said, turning to face her. "Isel doesn't know everything, and the situation with Adrienne, it's far from over. But he's too proud to admit how deep the betrayal goes. What I'm telling you is that if you agree to this marriage, you're not just protecting Isel's position, you're stepping into something far larger than just business." Kaylee felt her chest tighten, This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about loyalty, power, and something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. Marcus met her gaze. "Because Isel is in over his head, and if you want to walk away from this, it's your choice. But I believe you're smart enough to see that this isn't just a contract. It's a battle for control of everything he's worked for, and you're the only one who can help him win it." Kaylee stared at him, her mind racing. She had thought she was just signing a marriage contract. But this was a war of secrets, lies, and manipulation, and now she was in the thick of it. The weight of Marcus's words echoed in Kaylee's mind long after she left the meeting. She had come to Chosen Industries expecting clarity, a clear path forward, a decision she could make for her mother's future. Instead, she had uncovered a labyrinth of betrayal, manipulation, and corporate espionage. And at the center of it all stood Isel Chosen, a man who had built an empire and yet was caught in the very web of deceit his enemies had spun around him. By the time Kaylee returned home, the evening sky was streaked with dark clouds, matching the turmoil churning inside her. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Isel. "I'd like to meet tomorrow morning. Let's discuss this." A simple message, businesslike, but Kaylee could feel the undercurrent of urgency beneath his words. It was a stark reminder of the gravity of the decision she faced. The next morning, she found herself once again standing in the sleek lobby of Chosen Industries. This time she wasn't just another analyst rushing to put out fires or crunched between spreadsheets. No, now she was a potential player in a game that was far larger than herself, a game that was changing by the hour. She was escorted into Isel's office, and the familiar weight of his presence settled over her as soon as she walked in. His sharp gaze flicked up from the documents on his desk, his expression unreadable, though she could sense a flicker of something deeper. Tension, perhaps? Or the remnants of the war he was fighting behind the cool mask of the CEO. "You're here," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. "Please, take a seat." Kaylee sat down across from him, her eyes momentarily tracing the details of the room. It was immaculate, cold even, but the kind of cold that whispered of power. She had never noticed before how carefully everything had been curated. The perfect arrangement of furniture, the panoramic view of the city, the thick carpets underfoot that muffled the sound of footsteps, making everything feel muted, distant. "You met with Marcus, didn't you?" Isel's voice broke through her thoughts. Kaylee nodded, her stomach tightening as she met his gaze. "I did, and I have questions." "Ask them." She hesitated. "You've built this empire, Isel, but it's clear that you're not just fighting for control of Chosen Industries. You're fighting for your life, your legacy. I'm not just another business deal for you, am I?" Isel didn't respond immediately, as if weighing his words. When he spoke, his voice was softer, the edges of his usual coldness momentarily melting. "I didn't expect you to understand, Kaylee," he said, his tone reflective. "I thought this was just about a contract, a mutually beneficial arrangement, but I was wrong." Kaylee's breath caught. Was he admitting vulnerability? The man who had exuded control and power at every turn. Was he finally letting her see the cracks beneath the surface? "Tell me the truth, Isel," she pressed, her voice quiet. "What's really going on? Why are you letting me in on all of this?" Isel paused, then leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "Because, Kaylee, you're the one person who can help me fix this. Adrienne's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic, and it goes far beyond anything I ever imagined." Kaylee's pulse quickened as he continued. "My ex-wife wasn't just having an affair, she was being used. Hartford Global has been after Chosen Industries for years, but they couldn't get to me directly, so they went after the one thing I cared about, my marriage. She was a pawn in their game." Kaylee sat back, stunned. The pieces were finally starting to click into place. "But why didn't you tell me any of this?" "I couldn't," he replied, his jaw tightening. "I couldn't show weakness, and I didn't trust anyone. But now, with everything on the line, I don't have a choice. You need to know what you're walking into." Kaylee absorbed his words, feeling the weight of the situation sink in. Her mind, always analytical, began processing the information. She had been right to be cautious. This wasn't just a marriage contract. It was a battle for the future of Isel's company, a company that was built on the foundations of family, loyalty, and trust. "Do you trust me now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. Isel's gaze softened just for a moment before he nodded. "I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in a long time." Kaylee's heart skipped at his words. Despite the chaos, despite the stakes, something in her had shifted. She had come here thinking she would walk away from this marriage, from this life. But now there was a pull, a connection she couldn't deny. Was it just the situation? Or was it something more? "If you trust me," she said carefully, "then you need to know I'm not just signing this contract for the money. I'm in this for something bigger now. If we're going to do this, it can't just be about Chosen Industries. It has to be about us, too." Isel met her gaze, his eyes searching hers as if trying to read her every thought. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, he spoke. "I agree. This can't just be a business arrangement. We'll have to fight together, for everything, for the company, and for what comes after." For a moment, silence settled between them. A fragile understanding passed through the air, unspoken but palpable. She had crossed a line. She wasn't just a financial analyst anymore. She was part of this, and whatever happened next, they were in it together. Kaylee rose from the chair, her heart pounding. "Then let's do this together." The days following Kaylee's conversation with Isel were a whirlwind of decisions, meetings, and late-night strategizing. The weight of their partnership, forged out of necessity and now steeped in something far more complex, was beginning to take shape. Isel had pulled her into his world of corporate warfare, and she was quickly learning that in his world there were no half measures. Every action was deliberate, every word calculated. And yet, despite the cold exterior Isel presented to the world, there was a growing sense of something more between them, a shift that neither of them could ignore. The day after their conversation, Isel called a private meeting to discuss their next move. As Kaylee entered his penthouse office, the sight of him standing by the window looking out over the city made her heart race. He was always impeccably dressed, his sharp suit a testament to the control he exuded. But today there was something different in his stance, a tension in his broad shoulders, a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. It was a reminder of the burden he carried, the empire that he had built, and now needed to protect at all costs. "You're here," Isel said, turning to face her as she stepped inside. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady. "You called?" He nodded, his expression unreadable. "I need to show you something," he said, walking over to a desk cluttered with documents. He slid one towards her, an email printout. "This came in last night," he continued, "from an unknown source." Kaylee scanned the document quickly, her brows furrowing. It was a list of transactions, financial figures, and something that caught her eye immediately, the name Phoenix Global Investments. The name had appeared before in her research on the shell companies linked
to Morrison and Hartford Global, but this document added a new twist. There were connections to pharmaceutical companies, research facilities that were connected to the very project that had almost cost them everything. Phoenix Global? She asked, looking up at him. What's this got to do with Morrison's plan? Isel's jaw clenched, and for the first time, his cool demeanor cracked slightly. Phoenix Global is the real project, he said, his voice low. It's not just about taking over Chosen Industries. It's about control, complete control over the future of fertility treatments. And now they're using my company's resources to fund it. Kaylee's heart raced. You're saying that this Project Phoenix is connected to Chosen Industries? Exactly, Isel replied. Adrian's Betrayal, Morrison, Hartford Global, they all had a hand in it. But it's worse than I thought. They weren't just trying to acquire Chosen Industries, they were trying to use it to launch a project that would have changed the landscape of fertility treatments without oversight, without ethics. And my company's resources were being funneled into it. Kaylee felt the pieces falling into place, but there was still one question nagging at her. Why now? Why are they making their moves so quickly? Isel exhaled sharply, his eyes narrowing. Because the board is losing confidence. My divorce, the succession issue, it's all playing into their hands. They're closing in. And the only way to protect Chosen Industries is to fight back, to fight for control. She paused, her mind racing. And you think I can help with that? Isel's gaze softened, and for a moment, the mask of the corporate kingpin slipped. Yes, you're the only one who can help me piece this together. You're smart enough to see the bigger picture. You're the one person I can trust. Kaylee felt a lump form in her throat. There it was again, the unspoken connection between them. It wasn't just about the company, not anymore. She could feel it in the subtle shift in the way Isel spoke to her, the way his eyes lingered a little longer than necessary. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't the time for emotions. There was too much at stake. All right, she said, her voice firm. I'll help. But we need to move fast. I don't know how much longer we have before they make their next move. Isel nodded, his expression hardening once more. I agree. And I won't let them win. They spent the next few hours combing through documents, analyzing the connections between the shell companies, Phoenix Global, and the pharmaceutical firms. The scope of the conspiracy was vast, and the more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Isel's enemies weren't just trying to take over a company, they were playing a much longer game, one that threatened to destabilize the entire industry. The phone rang, breaking the silence in the room. It was Marcus. The FBI's ready, Marcus said, his voice tense. We've got the warrants to raid the Phoenix Global facilities, but there's a problem. What's the problem? Isel demanded, his voice sharp. They've already been tipped off. The facilities are empty. It looks like they've moved everything. Kaylee's stomach dropped. So they're one step ahead of us? Not anymore, Marcus replied. We've got a backup plan. The data's been secured, and we've traced it all back to Hartford Global. They can run, but they can't hide. We're moving in on their accounts next. Isel stood up, his jaw clenched. Make sure you have everything. This is our chance to take them down for good. Kaylee watched as Isel's demeanor shifted once again. The man who had seemed so controlled, so distant, was now all business. There was no room for hesitation, no room for weakness. He had a war to win. As Isel gave orders to Marcus, Kaylee took a moment to process everything. She was in the thick of this now. There was no turning back. The battle for Chosen Industries, for Isel's future, for her own future, it was just beginning. And in the midst of it all, something unexpected was happening. A bond was forming between them, a bond that had started with a contract, but was quickly becoming something neither of them had anticipated. The storm that had been raging around Chosen Industries and its future was finally beginning to calm. The walls that had once been closing in on Isel, Kaylee, and their shared fate had begun to crack, revealing a path forward, one that wasn't just defined by contracts and business deals, but by something far stronger: love. It hadn't been easy. The journey had been filled with betrayal, danger, and relentless maneuvering through corporate politics. They had fought against their enemies, against the past, and against the icy barriers they had both built to protect their hearts. But in the end, it was the one thing neither of them had expected that saved them: each other. Isel had started the journey with the belief that business was everything, that the future of his company, his legacy, could only be secured through control. He had buried his emotions beneath layers of power and precision, convinced that love was a liability. But through their shared struggles, through the battles they fought together, Isel had come to understand something more profound. Love was not a weakness, it was the foundation of strength, the unbreakable force that had allowed them to rise above the chaos and rebuild what had been torn apart. Kaylee, too, had been shaped by her own experiences. She had come into this world of high-stakes business with a clear vision of independence and ambition. But in the face of the unexpected, in the face of Isel's quiet vulnerability and the complexity of their partnership, she had learned that love wasn't about control or perfection. It was about choice, trust, and the willingness to fight for what truly mattered. Together they had faced the storm, and now they stood at the brink of something new. Chosen Industries was safe, its future secured. Adrienne's betrayal had been exposed, and the conspirators who had sought to undermine them were being dismantled piece by piece. But the real victory wasn't in the defeat of their enemies, it was in the transformation of the relationship they had built. The quiet moments they shared, sitting together hand in hand, watching the sunrise over the city, talking about their future, were proof of how far they had come. What had started as a business arrangement had become something far more profound. Isel and Kaylee were no longer just partners in business, they were partners in life. Their marriage, once forged from necessity, was now rooted in something real. The trust that had been carefully constructed, the love that had blossomed against all odds, had become the foundation of their future together. Kaylee rested her hand gently on her stomach, feeling the small flutter of life growing inside her. Their twin sons, Aiden and Ethan, were a living testament to their journey. A journey that had begun with a contract, but would continue with love, genuine, unwavering, and all-encompassing. "I never thought I'd find this," Isel murmured one evening, his voice full of wonder as he brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "Love, real love. But here you are, Kaylee. You and our sons. This is everything I never knew I wanted." Kaylee smiled, her heart swelling with affection. "And this is everything I never expected to find," she whispered, her fingers tracing the lines of his palm. "A family, a future. With you." Isel leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "We've built something beautiful, Kaylee. Together." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. The road ahead would not be easy. There would always be challenges to face, obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in years, Isel felt like he wasn't alone. He had Kaylee by his side, and together they would navigate whatever came next. In the end, they had proven that love wasn't just a concept to be managed or controlled. It was a force, a powerful, unpredictable force that had conquered all, betrayal, manipulation, and fear, and had turned a business contract into a family, a partnership, and a love story that would last a lifetime. And as Kaylee and Isel stood together watching their sons play in the garden, they knew that no matter what the future held, they had already won. Love had conquered all.